We are back here on the Analyticaliowan podcast. It is Thursday, May 21st, as I am recording this. And I'm trying something a little different today on TikTok. Now, I've been complaining about TikTok over several of the last few podcasts, and it's probably not going to change anytime soon. Um, Hopefully, I won't be complaining daily, but I tried something today. Posted this morning before recording this, and then I've got videos going up this afternoon. Different increments, different hashtags. I'm trying to break out of this new TikTok problem. And I'm sure you're seeing some of the things if you are following people over on TikTok. Their videos just aren't getting the views they used to. They are um, not getting pushed out. You're going to see creators that you haven't seen on your FYP for months in some cases. Uh, and what you're going to find is certain creators, if you start liking their content, if it does get pushed to the FYP, you're going to see that you see more of their content for a while, especially if it seems to be a creator that's new or doing up and coming content. You may see a bunch of their stuff. Now, why is that? Well, I've talked about it in a previous podcast, but I've been doing a lot more deep diving into what is going on with TikTok. Ever since the US divestiture and where they had to split off the US TikTok from main TikTok owned by ByteDance, they have changed how TikTok fundamentally works. They've changed how TikTok fundamentally works. And I don't remember if I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but what they do now is instead of pushing your video out to a test group of anybody and everybody, they push it out to a small group of your followers. Um, and if those followers engage enough, watch the video through, etc., um, they turn around and then they push it out to the broader FYP. And if it doesn't clear certain hurdles fast enough, first half hour, 45 minutes, and then I think the second hurdle is like by 2 to 3 hours, your video ultimately will collapse, and the algorithm will not know what to do with it other than it labels it uninteresting and pushes it down and doesn't release it out to the FYP. But what they don't do that they used to do is if it was ineligible for the FYP because of one reason or another, they would tell you. They don't tell you anymore. They don't tell you that you are ineligible for the FYP. They just bury your video. And that's why you have creators who have. Um, there was one I just was looking at who I hadn't seen her stuff in a while, and I had to go back and I could only remember part of her username, and I was trying to remember what the rest of it was, and was thinking, I'm like, I haven't seen her stuff in forever. Is she still making content? Turns out, yes, she is. She's got 5 million uh, followers on TikTok. And she made a post about it to TikTok. One of the last things she put up, actually, before she quit posting on TikTok, how she got a notification that one of her videos was a breakout success and it was doing better than 70% of other creators with a similar following. Keep in mind, she's got 5 million followers. Okay. Her video was stuck at about 2,500. 2,500 views on 5 million followers is ridiculous. That's not breakout. That's not doing anything spectacular. That is pathetic by 5 million follower standards. I used to get 2,500 views regularly before the US purchase of TikTok. Now my videos are lucky to get 250, but I only have 11,000 followers on TikTok. Um, I now post there mostly because it is the key to my automation everywhere else. But it doesn't do me any good. as far as getting me anywhere. I haven't made anything on TikTok in months. I think the last time I made any money and it was like $12 was I think October last year. And they have been slowly working on redoing how this all works. It's the same reason why uh, some of the other things aren't working as well. Your content filters, I've noticed before the US purchase, content filters worked perfectly. I'd put a hashtag I didn't want to see. Uh, I'd find the ones that would do Reddit stories over video game playthroughs in the background, and they annoyed me. And I figured out which hashtags would always bring up those kind of videos, blocked them all. Same thing with the ones where they're telling a story, or even they put an audio clip from a TV show over like something being dug in and then aluminum being poured into like sand or something to make a mold. They're just they weren't interesting to me. If they're what you like, fine, but they weren't interesting to me, and I found ways to block them. All of my filters from before the US purchase are still working the way they were intended. But I've put more keywords in trying to do the same thing since the US purchase, and it hasn't done anything. So I tried new hashtags today. I tried a different format. I tried changing up what time I post. Thought maybe if I could get one or two videos to break out, maybe I can break this cycle. And I'm going to be doing more tests like that over the coming uh, days, but I don't know if it's going to work because of um, the fact that I think TikTok is inherently broken. And it's all because of the US purchase and US business interests now are trying to make it more friendly to their ad revenue. If they don't want somebody controversial like myself calling Donald Trump a dumbass and pointing out the stupid things he's doing and how he may have dementia, to play a video like that, and then the next thing be a Hulu ad or a Disney ad, eh, because it makes companies like that nervous. Now, I'm not trying to call out Disney at all. I'm not saying it's their fault. They were just the first one I think of because I see a lot of their ads on, at least on my TikTok feed. So, as I say every day, we got a lot to talk about because there is always a lot to talk about. Now, first story I want to talk about is something that came up yesterday. Again, this comes from the Hill. Masonville's amendment limiting Congress judges to natural born citizens. Representative Nancy Mace, Republican of South Carolina, is proposing a constitutional amendment that would prohibit naturalized U.S. citizens from serving in Congress, becoming federal judges, or holding Senate-confirmed positions. In a Wednesday statement shared to Twitter, May said she introduced a long overdue joint resolution for the constitutional amendment, noting that the very same standard the president and vice president are already required to meet. And that is true. I'm not about the overdue part. About that is a requirement for the president or vice president. They must be a natural born U.S. citizen. Now that has been a point of contention um, to some people because for certain people, I'm thinking of Ted Cruz, and for John McCain. Ted Cruz was, I believe, actually born in Canada, and John McCain was born on a military base in Panama to American citizen parents. They didn't question his their either one of their citizenship when it came time to run for the president, as far as being a natural born citizen. But when it came to Barack Obama, who was born in Hawaii, um, and whose mother was an American citizen, based on the same standardized test, that they wanted to use that I'm comparing McCain and Cruz to, neither one of them were born on U.S. soil but had American citizen parents, therefore, they were American citizens at birth. Just having an American citizen mom should have been enough to make sure that Barack Obama had his citizenship, forgetting about the fact he was born in Hawaii. But Republicans like to point to his last name, the fact that he was African American, and they kept trying to make this claim that he was actually born in Kenya, which wasn't true, and it was just about racism. But now she is trying to put the same amendment to members of Congress, which are not required to hold the same standard, have never been. They have to be citizens, yes, but not natural born citizens. And I'm not 100% sure as to why there is the distinction, other than the fact that aside from the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate, who, after passing the 22nd Amendment, I believe, is the one that outlines or is it the 25th? It might be the 25th that um, outlines the actual line of succession. Let me look. Let's see. This actually says it was passed as an act in 1947. I thought it was a part of an amendment too. Anyway, uh, it'll come to me later. Um, it was the 25th Amendment. I just found it. Uh, but anyway, other than the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate, there are um, no other officers or no other members of Congress that are directly in line for the presidency. And how they handle it when it comes time for the Speaker of the House or the President pro tem of the Senate to actually become president, should that be necessary, is they get skipped. If something were to happen today, and something happened to Donald Trump, something happened to J.D. Vance at the same time, what would happen is Mike Johnson would become, as Speaker of the House, he would become president. Now that's scary enough. But if for some reason Mike Johnson, let's say he was only 27 years old, he's not, but let's just say he was, he would be ineligible to be president. Then it would move down the line again to another scary pick, to Chuck Grassley. Okay, Chuck Grassley, 92 years old. Now, if he was unwilling or unable for whatever reason, or let's say there was a reason why he was not eligible for some reason, let's say he had been president twice before, throwing up a random made up scenario here, but let's say he was ineligible. It would go down the line to Marco Rubio, etc. They keep skipping the next person until they get to somebody who who fits all the criteria. Now, Nancy Mace wants to try to put these uh, requirements on, saying the people writing America's laws, confirming America's judges, and representing America on the world stage should have only one loyalty: America, not any other country. For far too long, we've allowed foreign born members to hold seats in this government while making clear they are America last, not America first. We see it every day. This constitutional amendment will put an end to it. Now, right now, out of the 535 members of Congress, there are only 26 that are foreign born: 19 Democrats, 7 Republicans. But she only singled out 3 Democrats born in foreign countries as she made the case. Ilhan Omar, Sri Thanadar and Pramila Jayapal from Washington. All born in foreign countries, none were citizen by birth, all sitting in the United States Congress, making every single day their loyalty not to America. No proof. It's based on fear and racism. And the whole thing is probably not going to go anywhere. There's such a high bar for a constitutional amendment. It's why we won't see term limits for Congress. We won't see uh, term limits for Supreme Court justices, etc., because it's such a high bar. So I'm not worried about this passing because it's such a high bar. Now let's talk about what it takes to actually get a constitutional amendment through. Now I'm going to go back to that in a second, but let's talk about the high bar. It takes 2/3 of both chambers of Congress. Let's look at those numbers, okay? For the House, that would be 290 votes. They're currently sitting at 217 Republicans, and with one independent leaning their way. And that's before you account for the fact that Thomas Massie, having just lost his primary 2 days ago, has no reason to vote with Republicans at this point. He can vote however he wants. That leaves them at minimum, doing rough math, 72 votes short, assuming no Democrats sign off on it. Okay, so they're probably never getting out of the House. Let's look at the Senate. They need 67. They have 53. 54 if you count Fetterman. No chance. And even if by some miracle they could get this out to the states, they're not going to get 38 states to sign off on it. This is just performance. It's all performance trying to play up to the fears of their MAGA base. Now, Jayapal, who is a Democrat from Washington, called it racist legislation that denies the very history of a country that has been proudly shaped by immigrants. This narrow-minded xenophobic legislation has no place in Congress, and I call on my colleagues, including my Republican colleagues who are naturalized citizens, to condemn this, end quote. That is the brunt of it. Okay? This is performative. Thanadar said in a statement to The Hill, quote, gas prices have skyrocketed, people can't afford health care, and housing is through the roof. Instead of working to solve people's problems, Representative Mace is making racist and xenophobic attacks against me and my colleagues. Her comments are reprehensible, but it's clear this is what we can expect from MAGA. The party of protecting pedophiles, starting wars, and rising costs. And that's the whole thing here. It's distraction. The MAGA base looks at stuff like this and says, yeah, the MAGA Republicans in Congress are doing something. They don't understand the complexity of what it takes to get an amendment through. A bunch of them don't know what an amendment is, and it wouldn't surprise me if a large chunk of them, after seeing something like this done, definitively believe that it means that there will be no natural-born citizens in Congress ever. That this means it's already done. Well, they said it's done. It's done. Because they're the same ones that believe Donald Trump when he does something by executive order, and they treat it like it's gospel. So I'm not worried about this amendment going anywhere. The bar is too high, and it's set that high for a reason. Okay, the founders wanted the Constitution to be amendable. They knew they could not foresee everything. That's a fair assessment. Okay, you could not tell me there is no way that our founding fathers, for as wise as they were, sitting down in, I think what was it? It was ratified in 1789. In the 1780s, after we just won our independence from uh, England, we just got through a revolutionary war. We are launching a system of self rule that had never been done. Democracy was not the standard, it was the exception. Rule by monarch and king was standard. Yes, by that point, England did have a parliament, and they were a parliamentary monarchy. But even that wasn't absolute. It was nowhere near what it is today. The king and the royal family had a lot more influence directly over the affairs of government. A direct democracy was a new idea. And there's no way they knew all of the challenges facing us ever. They didn't know what to expect. They had no idea in the 1780s that at some point we should give women the right to vote. Hadn't crossed their mind. No idea had crossed their mind about, um, yes, there were abolitionist groups already at that point, but they had had to compromise during the Constitutional Convention, or not the Constitutional Convention, Continental Congress, I believe. I might be slightly mistaken, but I do believe there was a compromise there uh, to allow for slavery uh, because they were talking then already that they wanted to accuse the king of fomenting the slave trade, and the South did not want to accept that. They wanted to keep their institution. When they wrote the Constitution, they had to come up with compromises allowing for the counting of enslaved peoples and for the purposes of population, but they did not get the rights under the Constitution, nor did they get a vote. And they knew at some point that may come to an end. They needed a process, but they also didn't want it to be a situation where you could amend the Constitution willy nilly and that you could be changing the core of our government every few years. Yes, we would be changing who was in charge, but they wanted the general basis of the Constitution to remain the same, except for major changes. That's why they knew they needed a process to amend it, but they also didn't want it to be um, a quick and fast process. It had to be deliberate, and it needed to take time. That's why it's a multi-step process. Congress has to pass it, the states have to ratify it. Um, and I throw this bit of trivia out there whenever I can because it's just a weird piece of trivia. Depending on the wording they use on authorizing and ratifying amendments, depends what kind of a time frame they have to get it ratified. What could have been the 11th Amendment to the Constitution that ultimately didn't get passed until 1992, I believe. Maybe it was 94, one of the two, somewhere right in the early 90s. The 27th Amendment. It took over 200 years for it to get ratified. And that is the one limiting congressional pay, saying basically Congress cannot vote themselves a raise. If they do, it does not start until till after the next congressional election. So if today they voted themselves a raise, it would not start until 2027 because there's no guarantee then that the people who voted for it, a big chunk of them are probably going to get reelected. But there's no guarantee any of them get reelected. They would all have to face the voter. And that amendment took over 200 years to get ratified. All right, moving on. I'm not worried. I haven't heard a lot about it yet on social media, but I'm worried that people are going to see that and go off on it and think that it's going to happen and it's going to be a big thing. It's not getting through. It is such a high bar. Okay. Jamie Raskin introduces bill to block Trump's 1.776 billion after GOP blocks effort to subpoena Todd Blanche. This again comes from The Hill. Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland, top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, introduced a bill Wednesday to bar the Justice Department from using any of the $1.776 billion compensation fund to pay out those who claim any claims from people who say that they were allegedly harmed by the weaponization of government. The No Taxpayer Funded 5 Settlement Slush Fund Act of 2026 would bar the use of any federal funds to back the settlement and would also create new restrictions on payouts generally, including anyone convicted of rioting at the Capitol on January 6th from receiving any funds. The DOJ had created the fund after Trump administration agreed to voluntarily drop a lawsuit where Trump was seeking $10 billion in damages over the leaking of his tax returns. In doing so, they sidestepped a judge who had questioned whether the president and administration he runs were truly adversaries as required for bringing such suits. Then on Tuesday, Department released a memo barring the IRS from auditing or pursuing charges against President Trump related to his past tax returns. Raskin said in a statement, quote, Trump is trying to commandeer nearly $1.8 billion in taxpayer funds to bankroll a slush fund for January 6 cop leaders and aggrieved MAGA foot soldiers. This massive abuse of public money also has glaring constitutional defects. Only Congress has the power to appropriate federal dollars, and we didn't appropriate a cent for the J6 Millionaire Trust Fund. That's why I'm introducing the No Taxpayer Funded Settlement Slush Fund Act to shut down this highway robbery and restore the basic guardrails of how taxpayer dollars are spent. Congress must reassert the power of the purse and stop this brazen looting of taxpayer funds before this pilot program for massive partisan corruption becomes a permanent operating system of our government, end quote. And I agree with everything he said. Jamie Raskin puts it's right there. This slush fund is designed to pay out anybody who was at the Capitol, anybody who they think was wronged, people like Tina Peters out of Colorado, who was convicted on state crimes for tampering with election equipment, could say she was harmed by the weaponization of government and potentially get a settlement. No, we're already hearing about some of the people that were involved in January 6th talking about getting money. Some of the people who were involved in all of the things leading up to January 6th, like Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, whose company is almost completely in shambles, is basically trying to recoup all of the money he lost because he ruined his company, he ruined his image, he basically bankrupted himself over sticking with Donald Trump, and now he wants the taxpayers to fund it through this settlement. It's ridiculous. The bill would specifically block the $1.776 billion settlement. It would also generally bar future settlements tied to cases related to January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol or disputes over the 2016 or 2020 presidential elections. It also specifically blocks the president, vice president, cabinet members from receiving any money over litigation in these matters. And Raskin may be able to get GOP support from the bill. Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, Republican from Pennsylvania, when asked about the anti-weaponization fund, he said, quote, we're going to try to kill it, end quote. He added, quote, we are considering legislative options. We are going to write a letter to the Attorney General to start, but we are considering a legislative option. We are trying to unpack exactly, what the legal machinations are, but you can't do that, end quote. That's the thing. Republicans are turning against this settlement. They know it's a bad idea. As we were just talking about in the response to the no non-natural born U.S. citizens in Congress, etc. Amendment that's going nowhere. I think it was one of the two members of Congress that responded, and I've already closed the tab where I'd go look as to which one it was. But one of the two I just mentioned earlier, she mentioned how people can't afford food, medicine, housing, etc., and costs continue to skyrocket. And this is what the Republicans are focused on. And Republicans are saying, no, we got to get away from this. This looks bad. We can't win in the midterms with this. And of course, I'm going to say it. Democrats, they're doing the right thing, but part of it is, and I'm not going to say that they would actually back this if it wouldn't hurt them politically, but they know how politically disastrous this is. And Republicans are getting on board because they know how politically disastrous it is. I've been talking about how I think the House is going to flip from by 30 to 50 seats in favor of the Democrats. If they don't block this, my number might be low because of people's revolting against the Republican Party. Uh, Continuing on here, lawmakers on Wednesday moved to subpoena acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, as well as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and the head of the IRS, Frank Bisignano, and I probably butcher that name, and I apologize for that, among others, during unrelated House Judiciary hearings. That effort failed 18 to 17, but Democrats were able to get the backing of Kevin Keeley, an independent from California, who switched to independent after leaving the GOP after the redistricting effort of California. Now he switched to independent thinking it's going to save his seat. It won't. Let's see. Raskin said, quote, the Trump administration is perpetuating a fraud against America by taking nearly 1.8 billion of our money from the U.S. Judgment Fund for the payment of actual court judgments and damages, and without any legal authorization from Congress, purporting to use it to pay off his once and future private militia. End quote. The bill was filed the same day he launched an investigation into the $1.776 billion fund, sending a letter to those he tried to subpoena demanding more information about both the fund and the DOJ memo that forever barred and precluded the IRS from pursuing certain claims against Trump, his family, and their businesses. So they're looking into this stuff. It's getting bipartisan support, and they are going to have to answer it. Now, that's not the only challenge to this fund. Here's a separate article also from The Hill. Reading through here. Police officers who defended the U.S. Capitol during the events of January 6, 2021, have sued to block the creation of the fund. Those victims, the supposed victims that the Trump administration wants to claim here, could include people who were jailed and fined for actions taken on January 6th, which the group said meant it would finance the insurrectionists and paramilitary groups that commit violence in President Trump's name. Lawsuit from former Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn, Metropolitan Police Department Officer Daniel Hodges labeled it as a slush fund that the most brazen act of presidential corruption of this century. Both officers have spoken about their experience on J6 before Congress, Trump had pardoned 1,600 people who were charged with crimes. More than 140 officers were injured during the event. Now, Todd Blanche was talking to lawmakers Tuesday. There would be no partisan requirement to file a claim, but also declined to rule out whether campaign donors or oath keepers would be eligible. Todd Blanche said, "That is not for me to set out, that is for the commissioners. And whether an individual, an oath keeper, as you mentioned, applies for compensation, anybody in this country can apply." End quote. Yeah, it looks bad on its surface. Now, Vice President Vance, told reporters Tuesday the fund had been misrepresented and it's about compensating Americans for lawfare that we saw under the last administration. Except we didn't see lawfare. They're calling it lawfare. What we're seeing now under this administration, you could call lawfare. What they mean by lawfare is using the government to go after your political enemies. What happened with the January 6th defendants is they committed crimes, they were charged, and they went ahead and they had to serve their sentences up until Donald Trump pardoned them. It is ridiculous here. They want us to believe that this is all on the up and up. But we watch what this administration has done, firing prosecutors, bringing in different prosecutors, bringing false indictments, um, you know, not showing proper evidence to the grand jury or leaking what was shown to the grand jury, um, all sorts of things, all trying to constantly go after it. We've seen Donald Trump post on social media numerous times telling his attorney general to go after certain people. And that would be considered lawfare. Now they're trying to say what happened with the January 6th defendants was that it wasn't. It was just a uh, it was just criminals being charged for the things they've done. All right. Now, acting attorney. Here we got another story here. Raul Castro, the brother of former dictator and leader of Cuba, Fidel Castro, and I believe Raul has stepped aside as well, has been indicted by the United States. This again comes from The Hill. The United States on Wednesday indicted former Cuban President Raul Castro on charges including murder and conspiracy to kill U.S. citizens. Castro, the younger brother of late Fidel Castro, will turn 95 next month. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche on Wednesday insisted the U.S. expects to take him into custody. Blanche told reporters, "This isn't a show indictment. We expect that he will show up here by his own will or another way." Now, what he means by another way is they would do something similar to what they did in Venezuela, send the military down to go after him and get him. But you're going after a 95-year-old. It's while I understand the idea because they are still looking for um, people who would be in that age range or older who were involved with 1930s, early 40s Nazi Germany. Though an age has never been one to get you out of criminal liability for things you have done just because you are too old, unless you have some kind of uh, dementia or something like that that would get you out of being able to be in your right mind to understand the charges against you. But this indictment comes amid massive ramping up of U.S. pressure on the Caribbean island, where Fidel Castro came to power in 1959 after several years of revolutionary struggle. The economic situation in Cuba is dire, owing largely to an American blockade, but direct U.S. use of force to aim at toppling the regime would have hard to predict consequences. It could also be massively controversial. Uh, charges back. Now, here's what we know so far. Charges go back to 1996. Uh, the charges Raul Castro faces go back to the shooting down of two small planes 30 years ago. The planes were flown by members of a U.S. based group, primarily comprised of Cuban exiles called Brothers to the Rescue. Though the group's initial aim was to provide humanitarian assistance to people who fled the island, often in makeshift crafts bound for Florida, it was also expressly anti Castro, had at times airdrop propaganda leaflets over Havana. In February '96, two of three small planes on the group's missions were shot down by Cuban Air Force, resulting in 4 deaths. 3 of those killed were American citizens. Circumstances of the incident are contested, with supporters of the organization claiming they had not entered Cuban airspace and were shot down without warning. Cuban authorities said the planes were within their airspace and were warned. Fidel Castro was still in power at the time, and Raul Castro was his defense minister. Raul Castro gave up presidency in 2018 and retired from his leadership of Cuba's Communist Party in 2021. Current President Miguel Diaz-Canel has had to preside over ever worsening economic circumstances. But with current leadership imperiled, speculation has been rife as to who could be the island's equivalent to Venezuela's Delcy Rodriguez, who served as Maduro's vice president and who presides over a more U.S. friendly administration. They're not that much more friendly because it's literally everybody else is the same. Basically, all they're doing is saying flattering words to Donald Trump, and that makes them more U.S. friendly. The controversial figure of Raul Castro's grandson, Raul Guillermo Rodriguez Castro, looms large. The younger Castro is 41. He is a favorite of his grandfather. The younger Castro met with CIA Director John Ratcliffe in Havana last week. Previously, he was said to have held secret talks with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Still, skeptics have real questions over the political savvy and popular support of the younger man, often known as Raulito, or more unkindly in reference to a hand deformity, the crab. Donald Trump wants change. Specifics are vague. He wants to go after Castro, and I think some of that might have to do with the dementia. He remembers times when Cuba and Castro were major U.S. Enemies, and he wants to end that. Some Republicans are all but openly calling for military action to topple the communist government. But at times it sounds as if Trump himself is hoping for a Venezuela-like transition rather than a root and branch change. On Wednesday, when asked by a reporter about the U.S. potentially escalating the situation, Trump replied, "There won't be an escalation. I don't think there needs to be. Look, the place is falling apart. It's a mess, and they've sort of lost control." Well, it's a mess because Donald Trump is meddling with it. They weren't doing great beforehand, but they were slightly better before Donald Trump got involved. Now, what do the people want? Uh, we don't really know. Nobody entirely has a persuasive answer. Again, this all comes from the Hill. The current economically disastrous situation where power cuts are a daily occurrence and the necessities of life are running out, it is plainly not sustainable. Presumably, Cubans would welcome almost anything that brought respite from those circumstances. That hardly means they would welcome a U.S. invasion. Plenty of Cubans still living on the island harbor a deeply felt national pride about resisting American attempts at domination. For now, experts tend to think a full scale invasion is less likely than some kind of negotiated process, whether covert or overt, that results in a more U.S. friendly leader being installed. Would it work? I don't know. Uh, excuse me. The danger is that a figurehead would lack legitimacy. Alternatively, they could be welcome so long as they were able to bring immediate material relief and improvement. But barring catastrophic or an open ended conflict, uh, the impact on American politics could be modest. There are dangers in Trump in pushing for change in Cuba, but given the island's small size and enfeebled state, the risks seem much smaller than in Iran. The upside may be limited too, at least in electoral terms, however. Cuban Americans, usually anti Castro, are clustered in Florida. And Florida is basically Republican anyway, so it doesn't gain him much. But they are considering doing all of this. Now, why? Well, Donald Trump wants to be remembered, right? Part of this is about his legacy. He wants to be remembered as the man who took out Cuba. If he comes to some kind of a deal where they get a more friendly leader in there who begs to become a U.S. territory, for example, where they would then have access to federal tax dollars, and he could greatly improve the situation down there, all of those kind of things. Um, he would be, uh, in his mind, memorialized as a great leader. Do we need Cuba as part of the U.S.? Probably not. Donald Trump has been talking about a lot of places being the 51st state because, again, he wants that legacy of adding that state to the U.S. But if he really wanted that legacy, as we've talked about before, he could back statehood for Puerto Rico, but he won't because that would politically help the Democrats, and he wouldn't want that. So a lot of this has to do with a big chunk of it being about his legacy. Now, last story I'm going to cover here real quick. John Adams quote projected on DOJ building to protest the anti-weaponization fund. We talked about that kind of extensively, that fund. A quote from the second president, John Adams, was projected onto the DOJ building Tuesday night following the announcement of the anti-weaponization fund. Uh, The quote from Adams reading, quote, "a government of laws, not men," end quote, was projected onto a banner of President Trump which hangs on the building. Uh, Stacy Young, founder of Justice Connection, the network of DOJ alumni who projected the quote, said the group was sending a message to stand for the department's integrity and rule of law, according to NBC. She condemned the creation of that $1.776 billion compensation fund and said, quote, "This is an extraordinary abuse of power. It's a sign that the rule of law is crumbling before our eyes," end quote. Now, we have talked about, I spent a lot of time already talking about the fund. I'm not going to go back into it. Just interesting that they turned to uh, Adams to um, talk about it. And John Adams is a very interesting political figure. Now, he had done some things in his term where he was not popular, the XYZ affair, things like that. And if you want, I can do a deeper dive into the XYZ affair, um, and some of the other problems with atoms, either as a separate thing or on a future podcast. Just let me know in the comments. But John Adams was a polarizing figure, kind of like Donald Trump, but to the other side. He was obnoxious and disliked by a lot of the people around him. So just to me, it was interesting that they went with John Adams. But the quote stands: "We are a government of laws, not men." As I talked about earlier, when they wrote our Constitution, they designed it in a way that it could be amended, um, and they were not worried about it being perfect for all time because we weren't beholden to any one person, right? That's also why they split the power up. We are a country of checks and balances. You have the executive, you have the legislative, and the judiciary. The executive enforces the laws, the legislative writes them, and the judiciary interprets them, and also holds them up against the gold standard that is the Constitution itself. Now, this particular Supreme Court has issues, and they haven't done the best job at being completely independent, things like that. But typically, the U.S. Supreme Court is supposed to be independent of the other two branches. So the fact that this quote is up there, I agree with. I don't know if they're going to get into any legal trouble from posting it, but we are a nation of laws, not men, a government of laws, not men. It's true. Um, and we need to uh, focus on getting back to that and holding all people accountable for the law. And things like this slush fund that are just there to pay out supporters basically of one person is ridiculous. If this had been done under a Democrat, Republicans would be losing their minds. And that happens with so many things with Republicans nowadays. If the shoe was on the other foot, they would go absolutely feral. But because it's their guy, as of right now, they're standing with it. All right, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. Hope you guys have a great day, and I will be back tomorrow with another podcast.